Hey everybody, thanks for showing up. I'm surprised this room is actually quite full for like this early. I kind of expected maybe people showing up later. So my name is Tim van Helsdingen and welcome to the presentation. Not sure what happened to the font. It's supposed to be the same for all the presentations, but it changed for some reason. But yeah, welcome to my presentation called Bottoms Up with XPU. I'm gonna talk about a little demo sequence that I did for the for the Houdini 20 launch. So I had the opportunity to play around with Houdini 20 a little bit and to sort of test the waters with new Karma XPU that's now gone gold. So it's production ready release right now. So yeah, essentially you're going to talk about making sort of a fog commercial with XPU. Like I've done this a couple of times before with some of the other stuff that I did for side effects. Where like I did a sort of a candy bar fake commercial type thing. And then last year or in the year before we had something with like Mojito. So it's like this year's one is another one based on like just on sort of snacks and drinks. Not necessarily because I thought like let's do another sort of drinks commercial, but there's a couple of new things in Karma XPU that like I needed to demo, which kind of led me to doing another sort of drinks based video. So some of the new features, so some of the new features are this, like if you already know what all of this means, you're like, all right, makes sense where we're doing another drinks-based thing. So with this presentation, I'm first just gonna go through each of these things, what they kind of are, just break these concepts down, like what they are, and then we're gonna see sort of how that all ties into like the sequence that I made, so that at least we're sort of on the same page when we start getting to the to the sequence. On the right, you can see a logo. That's the XPU logo. It got its own logo now. Now that's sort of gone gold. So pretty cool logo. And I also put that in the sequence. But without further ado, let's actually look at the sequence. Hopefully it plays because it's like a embedded YouTube thing. All right, let's turn on the audio, and then hopefully everything will work. And there's no audio. All right, watch it without audio is also fine. Sploosh. All right. So yeah, lots of cool things going on. All right, let's go to the next slide. I hate Google Slides. All right, there we go. All right, so let's explore these features first, because yeah, they tie into the sequence that I made. So dispersion, essentially it's like if you have light is built up of a whole bunch of colors, as you know, and like if if it refracts through certain things, sort of the light will break up into a whole bunch of different colors. If it's raining, you can see that in like when you have like something like a rainbow. And also like when it shines through like something like a diamond or whatever, like you see this light breaking up, producing all kinds of nice colors, and we can do this with XPU now. A lot of these features were like, this was already working with CPU, but like now we got all this stuff working perfectly in XPU. So you see there's a new Material X standard surface. In the transmission tab you have dispersion. I'm not sure how visible it is, but it's over there. If it's 0, it's turned off, and essentially once you bring it higher, dispersion is introduced. The lower the value, the more dispersion, and sort of the more sort of this nice color you get. You see there, dispersion value of 0.044 gives you a lot of dispersion and sort of gets progressively less. The further you go, the higher you make it. So another thing, absorption. So there's another thing that was in Karma CPU before, but it's now making its way into XPU. And like in general, like they're getting really close. Also in terms of the look anyway, if you render something in CPU and XPU now, it pretty much looks the same. So that's really great. But what absorption is, it's essentially a slider. You can sort of control like how far can light pass through like a liquid before it starts refracting back the transmission color. So you can see here I have transmission color set up. You can see sort of the different values. So this was not working with XPU before, so essentially you just had to sort of just put a color there and just try to make something look nice. Now you actually have like a nice sort of slider to sort of control how far can this light sort of pass through my liquid, and you can see you can like get a very different result based on sort of the depth slider that you get. And you also see some of the dispersion just showing up because like the way that it's now refracting, so it looks quite nice. Nested dielectrics. So this was last year. This was actually announced as being in XPU. Well, it wasn't because of some miscommunication. But now it's actually in XPU. It actually works, and I used it quite extensively, sort of during my in my sequence. Also for a lot of stuff that you might not expect it. So like the olive, like moving to ice, it was used for that as well. I'll show demos of that in a little bit. Essentially what it means, it's kind of like a render time Boolean type of thing for refractive objects. So you kind of have to imagine, like if you have something like a glass with, so you have a glass, you have a liquid in there, you have ice cubes in there. Like how does the render engine know essentially what to refract back? Like because you have these ice cubes penetrating the water, and essentially with nested dielectrics, you can sort of give priorities of like what should it refract back, and you can see if the and essentially the lower the number, the higher the priority. So it's kind of like inversed, but you can set it up with render geometry settings, and you can see here if I put it on my eyes, I essentially if I put it to like a higher number than the liquid, you can see it just disappears. And of course, the image on the right is the correct one. So you have a lot of control there, and this actually helps in a lot of scenarios. It's really nice to have this because it makes life a lot easier. Material blending. The colors are a little bit weird here because I embedded a GIF or however you want to call it, because just easier than just doing looping videos. You can see we're blending from like a metallic material into a cherry. I know the animation looks a little bit weird from this angle, but I kind of like, I animated it so it like looked nice in the shot. So like just in this sort of look I've seen, it looks like the animation looks a little bit weird, but you can kind of see sort of we're blending between two very distinct materials. So that was not possible in XPU before. So you can now just make a make a mix, and you can see you can just blend different materials based on whatever you want to do. Like you put a prim var to mix between it, and there's some limitations still with this currently release in Houdini 20. So I found out like if you try to blend two materials with subsurface, that doesn't quite work. I'm sure that'll be worked out in the end, but for the most part, you can just blend materials. Only two, so there's like a hard-coded limit in XPU, so you cannot blend more than just two materials. Of course, you can do blends like before you have the material blend, but it's really nice to have this because it just makes life a lot easier. And I know this is something that a lot of people wanted from XPU, but now it's there. Geometry lights, pretty self-explanatory, but essentially it's you can set up sort of geometry to behave like a light. Essentially like this, you put a render geometry settings, and you can just essentially just like if you have an emissive material, you can now sort of control it as a light. So you have the light light intensity, sort of the light spread. There was sort of a way to sort of fake this before in like 19.5, where you would just make like two branches of your object and just crank up the emission on your material, but like there was like it got really noisy when rendering it and stuff like that. And now we actually have geolights, which is really nice. Doesn't work on volumes yet, but aside from that, they're good to go. It's really nice to have in XPU. So and cryptomats. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with what cryptomats are, but if you're not, they're now found. They're in XPU now with the terrible font going under the image, but yeah, essentially they're sort of they're special paths you can render, and essentially you can use it to create a mat from something in compositing. So you don't need to set it up beforehand, and then you can just like, I want my cheese to be blue because I like blue cheese, and I can just put the cryptomat in and then tint them blue, and then they're blue, and then that's very nice. So this was already working again in CPU, and what you would do before is to just do like an XPU render, and then you do, for example, do a separate CPU render with your cryptomats enabled to do like that. But now you can just do it in one go, and this is a lot easier to set up. Just quick tip: if you're compositing something like Fusion, enable the legacy EXR mode, because and I saw that question pop up a lot from a lot of people. So if you want to make a cryptomat, you can just go to your image output, extra render variables, create an extra render variable, put it to cryptomat, and like crypto material or crypto object, and you can render it. Essentially, the difference between the normal EXR mode and legacy EXR mode, you can kind of see this as your EXR is sort of like a zip container. Let's say you have a 500 megabyte EXR. sort of the newer way of doing XRs is that it doesn't, like if you're like compositing a nuke, then it doesn't need to read the entire 500 megabyte file. It can like grab one pass of it and a lot more efficient. Fusion doesn't do that. So you need to enable legacy XR mode, and then it works. Just figured I'd put it in there because I saw this question pop up quite a lot. So, all right, so now let's talk about actual sort of project specifics and how these sort of just things that I just talked about are actually used in the video. Right, so something not necessarily related to Houdini 20, but something that was just really cool to me. Retiming in lobs is amazing. So like you can, in Solaris, there's a retime lob, and essentially if you just put it somewhere in a branch, you can retime your entire scene in once. You can see my retimes there are colored green, so I didn't do it in one branch because I wanted like some to compute like velocity after the fact. But you can essentially just retime it all in lobs, and that includes cameras. And if you've ever done like sequence retiming in something like object context, you know, it can be quite a hassle. Like you need to put retimes in every of your nodes, and camera retiming is its own thing. It's terrible. It's a lot easier. So I figured I'd throw it in here because it's just really nice to sort of to be able to do. And I use this like extensively all throughout sort of the whole sequence. Yeah, so just fell on fluid. The presentation is mostly focused about Karma, but like figured I do one sort of show one recording of sort of the splash. So it's just fell on fluids, and I use this splash in all of the shots in the background. Just retimed it and all of the other stuff. So yeah, so just a little splash, and so essentially sort of how that was in the first scene. So I had essentially used all these objects on this wooden platter. I just animated the wooden platter up, had some rigid body stuff, blow it up, and then I did a fellow fluid simulation in the glass, and then it would splash up really nice. And I had all the retime set up in Solaris. I did have a retime in here on the fluids. I just linked those up because I didn't want to deal with the meshing inside of Solaris, although you perfectly could set it up to mesh inside of there as well. Yeah, let's talk about this sort of morphing like our olive into ice cube. This I think it's like pretty cool effect. Really like the way it looks. Again, the color is a little bit weird because we're having an embedded GIF, but yeah, so essentially sort of build up of sort of three different elements. So we have sort of just a standard sort of VDB advection setup where you essentially just advect a VDB sort of from its gradient. So essentially you see it as like a norm, like the normal of the surface. So essentially just advected out, advected outwards into a specific shape. And we have this olive in the center, which has an attribute going past it, which again I can use in this which is material blending, which is now new in XPU, so I could actually blend materials. And then over there, I just have some scattered points inside of the ice cube that I'm then sampling. So I'm volume sampling the SDF from the ice cube, and essentially just sort of multiplying the particle scale based on the distance from the SDF, so they kind of just grow in sort of as the thing grows. Like I know it's like super subtle, like you almost hardly see those little air bubbles, but they're there and they sort of add to the whole thing. Yeah, so then you have the like you just have a fade for the olive. It's very simple fade, but again, like it's just about mixing the materials. So here's where these nested dielectrics come in. You can kind of see like a pretty useful scenario. So you can see if I don't, like here I want to hide my my olive once it's sort of inside the ice, because you see else it just shows up within the refraction. I kind of wanted to feel like this ice is sort of just growing over it. So you can just use these nested dielectric with the priorities to sort of just hide it when it's like inside of the ice. And you can see like this is like a proper use of like something like nested dielectrics. Like so yeah, that's stuff like that. It's super useful for. So yeah, right. Oh yeah, so a couple of things here. If you've ever used Karma XPU before, it's like in terms of render settings, it's quite basic. You just essentially brute force a bunch of rays sort of through your scene to render. In Karma CPU, you have like the ability, for example, to just tweak your samples. For example, like you need maybe more refractive samples or something like that, or you can even like do it on an object. This doesn't work with XPU, so of course you maybe want to do stuff like that with XPU because maybe your scene might end up like a little bit noisy in some spots. So what I ended up doing is I rendered some of these objects separately, and I would just fire more rays at the specific thing. So for this scene, it's not super obvious, but Essentially I had a render and like the glass was just not clearing up with the amount of samples and like with a reasonable render time. So essentially I just rendered the glass separately, and you can set up with something like render geometry settings. You can essentially just put that on your environment, and it's like you just hide all the, everything except for the you hide the primary rays. Essentially it will just still refract the environment and still show up in the reflections. So you can just render your glass and just fire more samples at it. Glass will clean up pretty fast. You just layer those two renders on top, and then you're left with a much cleaner render with much less render time. So that's kind of like these workarounds to do this in XPU. You can see a pretty extreme example. You see a lot of noise over there on the left. Like I know the look is a little bit different because this was like an older render, but you can see like even at like 15 minutes a frame, that was just not cleaning up. And that's not because XPU is slow. It's essentially, there's geolights there, which are going through candles, which have subsurface. There's like a whole bunch of stuff going on. It was just hard to clean that up. But essentially, if you just like split it up, like all of the separate renders for these separate objects combined was less than the 15 minutes frame. You just need to sort of properly split it up and then just add it together. So you can see just a ground render, and like the candles were rendered separately, glass was rendered separately. But you can then sort of just, for each of your elements, just fire those rays. Like some people might already be familiar with sort of this workflow, but like with XPU, like you really get the most out of sort of the speed of setting it up like this for like the more complicated scenarios, instead of just rendering the whole thing in one go, just brute forcing samples through it. You can really speed this up because, like I mentioned, like the total render time of just doing it separately for each of the frames was like for each of the passes was lower than if I were to just like brute force rays on the entire scene, and it would end up looking cleaner. So that's some nice stuff here. Some additional tips and tricks as well. So Karma's CPU has a curvature shader and it doesn't work in XPU. But there's a sort of a trick that I found out for like using one of the other nodes. So there's Houdini 20 has a Karma rounded edge shader, which is like the intended use is to have like when you have like hard edges on something like a box, you can sort of fake like that it sort of looks round, which is, of course, is super useful on its own. But you can see there's a sort of a mask output there. And I figured like if I just use a mask output, I can use it to function as the curvature shader. So you can just use that instead, and it like works pretty well. So it's like a nice added benefit. Like, so if you run into that, just use the rounded edge, use the mask for it, and you can pretty much use it as is. So you can here see sort of how I'm sort of using this with this on something like, for example, like a cherry. So you can see works pretty well. Yeah, that's really nice to have. This was already in one build of 19.5, but you have these lens shaders now. And normally I do stuff like depth of field in compositing, but I figured with this stuff I just rendered as much as I could use directly in Karma. And then I just also started playing around with stuff like lens distortion and chromatic aberration. It's like it's extremely fast, and it's a lot of fun to play with. So essentially, you can just make like a Karma physical lens shader, and you essentially just drag it in your Karma lens shader, and you can just play around with it, and it's a lot of fun to just like make extreme distortions or whatever, and it's all physically accurate. So it's quite cool. Here's an example where I actually used it. So I actually in this shot, like I shifted sort of the focus because I wanted like more stuff to be actually in focus than it would be if you just normally set up your depth of field. So you can see how with this like tilt shift on this Karma physical lens, I can actually sort of really sort of push it in the direction that I wanted it to look like. So that's like quite cool to have. This I didn't see this mentioned anywhere in the release notes, but this is one of my favorite features actually. So you can see there's a very low resolution grid, and you can actually now do Karma like point cloud lookups and directly in Material X, which is super cool. So here is just a simple pick, and I'm like transferring the color to the grid. But like it's a super low resolution grid, and like normally you would, if you want to do something like this for XPU, you would need to transfer it on the geometry, and it would deal with heavy geometry. But you can, as you can see, you can just do it now directly in Material X, which is really nice to have. It does need a point cloud file, so you can just either write out a .pc file, so point cloud file, or you can just load a BGO. So it doesn't link directly to something like a lob somewhere, or just something in SOPs. That would be amazing if the developers listening like make this work with just like putting something in there and just have it work directly. But you can already see like something like this is type of stuff you would do a lot. Like let's say you're doing wet maps or something like simulation, liquid splashing on something. You could like use your like your high resolution mesh to just render on. Like you wouldn't need to transfer anything on there. Just really nice to have. Yeah, and there's another thing just there's new sort of Karma Material XPBR texture set, which just makes it easier to just link up some of these textures a little bit easier than it was before. And theoretically, it should be that. Oh, I finished early. When I practiced it, it was like exactly 30 minutes. But I guess we got extra time then for questions. So, are there questions?
Questions?
I'm sure there are some questions. No? All right. No questions. All right. Oh, there are questions.
Hey, really interesting.
Yeah.
First off, thank you. It's kind of a tangential question, although it is based around ComXPU. So I'm quite curious about baking workflows and interested in using GPU rendering to speed that up, sort of going high poly to low poly for games kinds of pipelines. Do you know kind of what state that kind of workflow is? Is it supported?
I know there's a baker. I'm not sure how that like. You would have to ask someone who is like does more on that side. I don't know. I haven't used it, so sorry.
Okay. Oh no, that's all right. It was a bit of a tangent, so.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But like, there's probably people around here that know. So just ask someone from Side Effects, I guess. Oh.
So there are two bakers now in Houdini, which is the Labs Baker and the Simple Baker. The Labs Baker works basically on its own. It's made by Paul Ambrosen, who is not here, so you should bother him as well. And then there's also like the Simple Baker, which is still using Mantra, but hopefully, I'm hoping the Karma might make its way, or XPU comes its way to maybe having indeed like baking options for games would be really cool and really fast to see that coming.
Any other questions for Simon? Other questions on Karma?
Also, feel free to ask any questions about the sequence, even if it's not about the Karma stuff. Just,
Going once, going twice. Oh, just 1 sec. 1 sec.
Hi, one of the things that was quite interesting, I think you just touched on it in the last one, was that texture import. Is that just a way of importing like mass amounts of textures and then just directly plugging them in?
Yeah, it's essentially just an easier way to just like set up your material, like your PBR materials. Like normally you would like need to put something like just make individual like just image like texture nodes for that. But with this one, you can just put in like all of your different maps. You either put it to projection type UV or triplanar or something like that. You just plug them in. Just a lot easier to just set it up like that. If you just have like just PBR materials, just a nice thing to have. There's a ton of new like smaller stuff, and I only had like 30 minutes, of course, to like put it in the presentation, which I guess I could have put more because I finished early. But like like I mentioned, when I practiced it was exactly 30 minutes. Yeah, it's just a new node, and there's a whole bunch of just smaller new stuff as well. It's like I briefly touched upon it as well. It's not necessarily related to your question, but like Karma CPU and XPU are now like they really look like pretty much identical, which is like in 19.5 it was like somewhat identical. Now it looks exactly the same. So there's a lot of just smaller new stuff that just are just really great to have, and it's been a big improvement with with Karma XPU in general, but also just with building materials in Material X, because that was a little bit limiting like early on. It's starting to get better with like new nodes. There's also a ramp node, like a Karma ramp node. Now you can do ramps and stuff like that. That was not there before, and a bunch of other stuff that should make material building a little bit easier.
Thank you.
And it's not quite Karma, but there's no Vulkan render node or OpenGL render node that you've seen?
No, I think like also for the Vulkan stuff, I think that was like still beta and it's like hidden by default. I think it's like locked behind an environment variable, stuff like that. I'm sure that'll come at some point, because I think like it's like, does anybody know if like is Vulkan is going to replace OpenGL, right, at some point? Yeah, he's nodding. So like I'm sure like stuff like the OpenGL render node is gonna be replaced for something like a Vulkan render node at some point. But like all of that stuff, that Vulkan stuff is like pretty early. But it'll be great to have once it's like fully there. So
Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Tim. Can you go back to that slide you just had? So
yeah.
the node on the left.
Yeah.
So it's pulling everything together.
Yeah.
In terms of the image filter, so it's set to linear. So I'm guessing that's for like roughness and normals.
Yeah.
bumps.
Yeah. There's different filter types.
So in terms of when that's pulling all the different sort of image sets together, do we only have access to what changing one image filter at the moment? So the color would be set to RGB.
Yeah, well, like if you want more control, I guess, over the individual filtering, you could still just set it up individually, just like put your texture nodes individually. But this is just an easy way to just load in all of these textures, plug them in. And of course, if you want just more granular control for this, like plugging stuff in, you can still do it like the older way with just the regular texture nodes, or use the just like use triplanar mapping, use like whatever. Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. So when using displacement with XPU in 19.5, I've had a bunch of problems. I'm just wondering what your experience with that has been now that XPU is in gold.
Well, displacement quality is better. I still had like some instability issues here and there and like some weird stuff. But the quality has definitely improved. But there were like I still had some issues with it throughout production. But again, like I'm not like maybe some of these things have improved during sort of the build cycle. But of course, like I already had some stuff rendered, so I'm not sure if they cleared up at some point. For example, with the ice cubes, I'm using normal maps there for some of the detail instead of displacement, because I had like some instability issues with like trying to displace that with the triplanar mapping and stuff. But that could be fixed now during the release cycle, because of course like I'm working on this like in the beta software and they're still like pushing updates every day. So like it's gotten better, especially the quality has gotten better, because like in 19.5 it was still like quality wasn't quite there. That is definitely improved. But aside from that, there's like still some quirks, but it's gone a lot better. So
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thanks very much, Tim. Great presentation.
thanks for coming.